Tonight, a U.S. Army Major General dead after a man dressed in an Afghan Army uniform opened fire on a military training base in Afghanistan, leaving more than a half a dozen Americans wounded. Tonight, military analyst Mike Lyons joins our panel with how he believes the U.S. ought respond. And the police related death of 43-year-old Eric Garner has many questioning whether the NYPD's crackdown on low-level offenders ought to be reformed. Is broken windows, as it's known, policing? Is that a broken policy? Well, New York State Senator James Sanders, he'll be speaking out on the issue to RFL. Plus, we'll head to Rikers Island, where a new federal report shows adolescent inmates among those being severely abused by correction officers. And the question is Rikers in need of a massive overhaul? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get into those issues and more this hour, but we begin overseas in Afghanistan, where a U.S. Army Major General dead following a devious attack. Authorities say two-star General Howard Green, he was the highest-ranking military officer killed since 9/11. Pentagon says 8 American soldiers were also hurt when gunfire erupted on a military training base located west of Kabul. Authorities say the attack, it was an inside job. It was apparently an inside job.
It's a terrible day, a terrible tragedy.
A gunman wearing an Afghan army uniform turned his weapon against Americans, Afghans, and NATO soldiers. A U.S. soldier told ABC News that a two-star Major General was killed, making him the highest-ranking fatality in either the Afghanistan or Iraq wars. 15 were wounded, including 8 Americans. All are expected to survive. The attack happened at this military training facility about 11 miles outside of Kabul. A sprawling compound starting last fall, it was used to train Afghan forces. The group of coalition members were on site for a visit when the attack occurred. This is the latest in a string of so-called green-on-blue attacks in Afghanistan, where members of the Afghan forces have attacked U.S. and coalition forces.
Afghanistan is still a war zone. So it's impossible to completely eliminate that threat, I think, particularly in a place like Afghanistan.
The last major incident in Afghanistan was in 2010, just before the American troops surged there. A suicide bomb ripped through a NATO convoy in Kabul, killing 12 people, including 5 American soldiers. But those attacks have become less frequent each year as fewer U.S. troops have been on the ground. Now, military officials said that the number of insider attacks has dropped sharply last year. In 2013, 16 deaths and 10 separate attacks. And if you compare that to 2012, when 53 coalition troops were killed in 38 separate attacks. I want to bring in our panel right now Mike Lyons, military analyst for CBS News Radio and affiliate CBS stations across the country. Also, senior fellow at the Truman National Security Project in Washington. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. And you know, Mike, every soldier, every civilian lost is all tragic. But talk about the significance from somebody who put on a uniform here and knows about some of these places we're talking about when a general is killed, especially with an inside job.
Yeah, two-star general, 35 years in the military, served this country throughout. Engineer, logistics guy, was there in Afghanistan to help this movement of material and equipment back to the United States. He was in that command team there. We'll find out whether it was a ceremony that took place. He also had a bodyguard and guardian angels, so there were people around him that were armed, which surprises me to the level of damage that this attacker caused during this attack.
You know, when we hear stories of this, and then you contrast with some of the facts say that these type of inside attacks are down from year to year, but when you look at the drawdown that's going on right now, are these kind of stories, especially when we look to see what happened in Iraq right now, something the American public will need to gird themselves more to, where, you know, the Afghans having to police their own country, if you will, it's not if, but it's when, that these kind of things, you know, when we're talking about a green-on-blue attack, they're going to hear more and more of, or no?
Yeah, I'm hoping that this was a ceremony and they just unfortunately let their guard down. Let's say if he was involved in the command team, because there was a German officer that was wounded as well. So that tells me other NATO countries were involved with this. It was something going on. There was an officer training campus where officers are trained and skilled at. So, but I do think on a going forward basis, we've just got to increase our watch, increase our awareness, perhaps demilitarize and take weapons away from everybody in this kind of environment, and it will cause American soldiers to be looking over their shoulders for the next few months.
You know, the public gets certain impressions when we've seen guys we've trained either, you know, drop their weapons, melt into the crowd like we've seen in Iraq, some of the Iraqi military, or not fight at all here, and then have questionable loyalties depending if they're Sunni, Shia, whatever else. What should the public feel in terms of the quality of the Afghani troops that we've trained and put so much blood and treasure into?
Well, it's better than it was. The question is, it'll never match a U.S. military organization. It'll never match anything that we've seen in any of these NATO groups in itself. And that just gets down to the fact that some of these individuals in this military don't have any nationalistic ties towards Afghanistan. It's more towards their tribe or their organization or something else. You know, what binds us all together in our country is our laws and the fact that we're Americans, and deep down, it's against the law to kill somebody in our country. And in Afghanistan, you know, perhaps this was done by someone who just felt the need to make a statement, and in his group, that's okay. So I think that's the thing, that's the linchpin that's missing as we train other soldiers. We could train you operationally to be a soldier, but we might not necessarily be able to train you to fight or actually defend or do the right thing.
Because I think for so many that don't have a fraction of your experience in this, we see this and we say, wait a minute, we got on the right you know, equipment. We've done the training with them. We've had people invested in it. Yeah. In many cases, they fought side by side with them. Why is it so hard to get them to take ownership of their own country? You don't want to cast this giant blanket like it applies to everybody, because in many cases, you know, some of the guys who've done the training said, I'll serve with that guy any day, my Iraqi or Afghani counterpart. You know, don't lump him into that category. But is the problem more regional, or is it just across the board? Yeah,
it is somewhat regional, because it's difficult to take a person from a different part of Afghanistan and bring them to a different place in Afghanistan, bring them to the east, let's say, and have them get into the society. Now, this is also an individual. The attacker went through a very sophisticated vetting process once the last green on blue attacks were happening. Some 7 steps, multiple people had to be involved. There were multiple things that ensured that this person, whoever it was reliable. The fact that he was able to get, you know, inside the wire with a weapon, obviously a loaded weapon, and have all these things, you know, that inside job, to your point before, means there's multiple other people involved. It's a conspiracy, and I think, you know, that's investigation will show.
Mike, we're in the process of pulling down our numbers in Afghanistan. I think it's the end of the year, right, when the transition actually takes place?
Well, 2016 is when the commitment's been. The issue is the president wants to get to 10,000 troops by the end of this year. That's a lot of material and equipment. Still another 20,000, 25,000 troops that have to come out between now and then.
As we wean down our forces to get to that number, does it make it more likely that these kind of attacks would happen because there are fewer personnel there to try to prevent them? Does it make it less likely that it would happen because it's fewer targets?
Yeah, it's just a function of each of these individual units. And what's happening is they're kind of rolling back their units back to Kabul and those areas in this place. Now, this is an area, well, this is a place that there's a large U.S. military presence there, because it's an officer training center. There's hundreds and thousands likely.
It's one of the safest locations,
absolutely,
right?
Exactly. And so, again, triple concertina wire, there's multiple ways to ensure that this kind of attack doesn't happen.
Finally, Mike, when we see this, what always goes through my head is you're one of the remaining troops there, right? And they're getting down to 10,000, whatever the number is at the end of the year, and then the following year they're all gone, right? Logic just says the human condition is, we gotta run out the clock here, right? And when they see things like this, I imagine it puts this thing even more on edge. Yeah,
no question. It gets to you thinking about, would not want to be the last casualty out of Afghanistan. It just doesn't make sense, and in some ways you speed up the process. I think you saw Captain Kirby talk specifically about it's not going to change our plans, not going to change anything, but there's no question that days like this, the morale is low within those units, and the commander's going to have to work double time in order to reestablish their fate. I wouldn't be surprised if they separated these units and then no contact with Afghan units for a while until they can reassure each side that this won't happen again.
Mike, thank you as always. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich. Thanks for having me.
All right, when we come back, we're going to move much closer to home. Up next, NYPD's broken windows policy. Some are asking if it's broken, in need of reform here, or scrapped altogether following the police-related death of Eric Garner. And many saying a lot of similar cases out there that have the questions is it worth it? After the break, we're going to hear from State Senator James Sanders, who tells us why he believes the city is over-relying on this strategy.